So society treats your conscious mind as like the ultimate pinnacle of evolution.
Oh, absolutely. We
Yeah,
completely revere the intellect.
yeah, we glorify conscious thought. And we basically assume that our active waking awareness is the CEO of our lives.
Right, the one calling all the shots.
Exactly. But neurobiologically speaking, your conscious mind is actually just a holding pen for all your failures and your unsolved problems.
Which is just a brutal way to think about it, but it's true.
It really is. So welcome to a brand new deep dive. We are tackling what is probably the most frustrating, eternal human dilemma.
The intention-behavior gap.
Yes. Why perfectly understanding the right thing to do is, well, it's almost never enough to actually do it.
It's that infinite, agonizing gap between the intellect and the action. I mean, we spend our entire lives gathering data on how to be better, right?
Oh, constantly. How to be more productive, how to be healthier.
Right. And then we routinely, almost violently, just ignore all of that data in the exact moment of decision.
We really do. And to figure out the actual mechanics of that failure, we are pulling from a really fascinating intersection of fields today.
Yeah, we've got a great stack of sources for this one.
We do. We'll be looking at the cutting-edge neurobiology of Bridget Queenan, examining cognitive psychology meta-analyses on behavioral gaps from researchers like Esther Papes, and digging into the rigorous experiential learning models of David Kolb and Clifford Morris.
It's a really unique blend of biology and psychology.
It is. And we are framing this not as like a theoretical science lecture, but as a custom-tailored manual for hacking your own operating system.
Because that's what you need to actually make a change.
Right. So if you have ever set a 5:30 a.m. alarm with absolute conviction, knowing exactly why you need to wake up and work out.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Only to hit the snooze button in a completely zombified state a few hours later, we're going to break down the exact biological gears behind that failure today.
Because, the problem isn't that you lacked willpower.
No, not at all.
And it certainly isn't that you didn't have enough information about the benefits of cardiovascular health.
Right. Your brain knows working out is good.
Exactly. The problem is that you're fundamentally misunderstanding which part of your nervous system is actually driving the car. And more importantly, how that specific neural circuitry learns.
Okay, I want to jump straight into Bridget Queenan's work here because her fundamental premise just completely dismantles how we assume the brain operates.
It really does. It's a total paradigm shift.
Yeah, the idea that the conscious mind is a, quote, failure room sounds almost insulting at first.
Yeah.
I mean, walk me through the actual metabolic and structural reality here. What is the conscious mind actively doing if it's not running the show?
Well, it requires us to completely change how we view cognitive resource management.
Okay.
Queenan points out that the conscious mind, which is largely localized in the prefrontal cortex, is this high metabolic cost workspace.
Meaning it takes a lot of energy to run.
Huge amounts. It burns through glucose incredibly rapidly. So, evolutionarily speaking, it is not designed for routine maintenance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's specifically reserved for anomalies. It's basically your brain's scratch pad for problems you haven't solved yet. So when you encounter a novel situation or, an obstacle or you're trying to learn a complex new skill, that's when the prefrontal cortex lights up. It's highly flexible, but it's an incredibly inefficient biological engine.
Okay, let's unpack this. So it's not the CEO dictating daily operations. It's more like the emergency troubleshooting department.
That is a much more accurate structural model, yeah.
Okay, so think about the neurology of learning a complex motor skill, right?
Right.
Like balancing on a bicycle for the first time.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right, because the sheer volume of action potentials firing in your prefrontal cortex when you're trying to do that is just staggering.
Yeah.
You are consciously calculating the angle of the handlebars, the pressure on the pedals, your center of gravity.
The velocity of the pavement, yeah.
Exactly. It requires immense, totally exhausting conscious effort. Your cognitive load is completely maxed out because, well, balancing on two wheels is an unsolved physical hypothesis for your nervous system at that point.
Right, you haven't figured it out yet.
But obviously it doesn't stay that way.
Yeah.
Because once you actually learn to ride a bike, the experience completely inverts.
It becomes second nature.
Yeah, you can ride through a complex intersection while actively daydreaming about some conversation you had 3 weeks ago.
Your conscious effort literally drops to zero.
And that drop to zero is the key mechanism here, right?
It is. Once a problem is solved, your nervous system simply cannot afford to keep running it through that highly inefficient prefrontal cortex. It physically moves that knowledge.
Wait, it physically moves it, like to a different part of the brain.
Yes. The brain triggers a process of neuroplasticity, specifically utilizing dopaminergic pathways to reinforce connections in older, deeper structures of the brain.
Okay, like where?
Most notably, the basal ganglia and the striatum. The conscious mind actually actively discards the solved problem to free up computational RAM, so to speak.
Oh, wow. I want to pause on the basal ganglia for a second because we hear so much about the prefrontal cortex, but the basal ganglia gets way less press.
It really does, which is a shame because it does so much heavy lifting.
Right. So this is essentially the automated operating system, right? So
hmm
the conscious mind is like a chaotic startup incubator where everything is untested and stressful. And the basal ganglia is the boring, established corporate factory that just mass produces the successful products.
I love that analogy. Yes, what's fascinating here is that the basal ganglia is this ancient cluster of neurons deep within the brain, and it handles all the solved mysteries of your life.
Like breathing.
Breathing, walking, driving a familiar route to work, pouring your coffee, tying your shoes. These are highly myelinated neural pathways.
Myelinated meaning like insulated.
Exactly. When a behavior is repeated and it's successful, the brain physically wraps those specific neural axons in this fatty substance called myelin.
Okay.
And myelin acts like electrical insulation, which allows the signal to travel up to 100 times faster and with significantly less energy leakage.
100 times faster. That's insane.
It's massive. It's the difference between driving on a muddy dirt road versus a freshly paved high-speed autobahn.
Wow.
The prefrontal cortex is basically a network of dirt roads. I mean, it's flexible, you can go anywhere, but it's slow and it uses a ton of gas.
Right.
Whereas the basal ganglia is a network of superhighways.
Which implies something pretty dark about our internal monologues, if you think about it.
Oh, for sure.
Right. If the basal ganglia handles all the successes, all the perfectly myelinated superhighways, and it operates silently,
Completely silently.
then what exactly is left floating around in our conscious awareness?
Only the dirt roads. Only the friction. Yeah, if you spend all your time dwelling in your conscious mind, like if you're constantly living in your head, you are effectively only spending time with your failures.
That is so depressing.
It is. You are exclusively hanging out with the items lingering on your cognitive to-do list. The conscious mind is essentially a space of perpetual, unresolved biological friction.
This reframes the entire concept of anxiety and overthinking for me.
How so?
Well, when I'm sitting on the couch agonizing over a decision, running through a dozen hypothetical scenarios, I usually feel like I'm doing important high-level intellectual work, like I'm deliberating.
Right, you feel productive.
Exactly. But what Queenan's data suggests is that I am just marinating in my own unsolved errors. I'm just burning glucose without generating any actual structural solution.
Precisely. You are staring at an uncompleted biological to-do list, which inherently triggers a stress response.
Because the brain hates open loops.
Exactly. The brain desperately wants to offload that task. It wants to myelinate a pathway, graduate it to the basal ganglia, and just relax.
Right.
So overthinking is just the act of forcing the brain to stay in that high-energy, high-stress prefrontal cortex. You analyze the problem from every abstract angle, but you never actually feed the basal ganglia the specific data it needs to build a superhighway.
So if the prefrontal cortex is just a temporary, highly stressful troubleshooting space, why do we rely on it to drive massive life changes?
Well, because it's the only part we're aware of.
Right, because that's what we do. We read a self-improvement book, we decide we're going to be more patient or eat healthier, and we just plant a flag in the prefrontal cortex.
We assume that having the conscious thought is enough to command the rest of the body.
Yeah. But when you look at the psychological literature, that assumption falls apart spectacularly, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. And this is where Esther Pape's meta-analyses become incredibly relevant. She studies that exact gap, the gap between what we consciously intend to do and what our bodies actually execute.
The intention-behavior gap.
Yes.
The scientific term for human hypocrisy, basically.
It is a brutal term, but it's deeply accurate. Pappies and her colleagues have conducted these massive reviews of clinical studies tracking all sorts of things: health behaviors, dietary choices, recycling habits, you name it.
Okay.
And they isolate groups of people who have sincere, highly motivated, conscious intentions to change a behavior.
So people who really, truly want to change.
Sincere intentions, yes. And what they find consistently across thousands of data points is that conscious intention only accounts for a remarkably tiny fraction of the actual variance in behavior.
Wait, I really need to push back on that. When you
Yeah.
say a tiny fraction, how small are we talking?
Very small.
Because if I intend to go to the gym, that has to account for something. It can't just be a statistical rounding error.
Well, it's slightly more than rounding error, but really not by much. Depending on the complexity of the behavior, conscious intention often predicts less than 20 to 30% of the behavioral outcome.
Wait, less than 30%? That's nothing.
It's wild, right? The other 70 to 80% is dictated by automatic habits, situational cues, and environmental triggers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, your sincere glucose-burning conscious commitments are routinely and honestly violently overridden by the heavily myelinated pathways of the basal ganglia.
I want to dig into the methodology of these meta-analyses because we need to understand the mechanism of that override. Like, how exactly does an environmental cue defeat a conscious goal in real time?
Sure, let's go back to the 5:30 a.m. alarm example.
Okay, perfect. Let's map the neurology of that exact moment.
When you make the New Year's resolution to wake up early, you are forming an abstract concept in the prefrontal cortex.
Right, you're sitting in the incubator.
Exactly. You have the knowledge that cardiovascular exercise lowers mortality rates. You have the strong desire to be fit. But the basal ganglia does not speak the language of abstract mortality rate.
No, it just wants to keep you comfortable.
Right. It speaks the language of deeply wired pre-existing motor patterns.
It only understands the Autobahn that has already been built.
Exactly. And your existing Autobahn is wired to favor thermoregulation and sleep preservation.
Keep the body warm, stay asleep.
Yes. So 5:30 a.m. hits. The alarm goes off. What happens? Your prefrontal cortex, which is groggy and low on glucose because you literally just woke up, tries to boot up its argument about cardiovascular health.
It's trying to plead its case.
But the environmental cues are immediate. The room is dark, the air is cold, the bed is soft.
Oh, the bed is so soft at 5:30.
Right. And these sensory inputs bypass the slow prefrontal cortex entirely and immediately trigger the basal ganglia.
Whoa.
The automated motor program for reach out and hit the snooze button fires at 100 times the speed of your conscious thought. The action is executed before the prefrontal cortex can even finish formulating the word mortality.
The literature uses a specific framework here that I think is just brilliant for visualizing this. They distinguish between knowledge being conceptually thin versus structurally thick.
I love that framework. The thick versus thin distinction explains everything about why we fail.
So abstract rules, scientific data, a motivational quote, a podcast on productivity, these are all conceptually thin.
Very thin. They are basically just lightweight action potentials dancing across the prefrontal cortex. They have absolutely no physical density.
They're just transient electrical sparks.
Yes. But a habit like reaching for your phone the exact second you feel an awkward silence in a conversation, or, hitting the snooze button when cold air hits your face, that is thick.
It has actual weight to it.
It has structural weight. It is physically constructed out of dense myelin and deeply ingrained synaptic connections.
Oh, it's not a fair fight.
Not at all. A thin, conscious intention simply cannot exert enough biological force to stop a thick, structurally reinforced habit in the heat of the moment. The physics of the brain just don't allow it.
But hold on, if we take that to its logical conclusion, we run into a massive philosophical wall here.
How so?
Well, if our conscious intentions are practically useless against these thick automatic habits, why do we even bother setting goals?
I see what you mean.
I mean, are we just biologically doomed to act out our programming? Because we just established willpower is just prefrontal cortex stamina, which is highly limited and bound to fail. So why even try?
It feels incredibly deterministic, doesn't it? Like, if the conscious mind is so weak, why did evolution even bother giving us one?
Exactly.
But this is where we have to clarify the proper role of the prefrontal cortex. The conscious mind is vital, but it is not the engine of the ship.
Okay, what is it?
It is the rudder.
It sets the coordinates.
Exactly. It is absolutely essential for pointing the massive ship of your life in a new direction. Goal setting isn't useless.
Right.
You need that high-energy troubleshooting space to calculate that, hey, the current trajectory leads to a reef, and you need it to plot a new course.
But a rudder can't propel a ship.
Exactly. The rudder lacks the mechanical thrust to actually move the ship. The structural flaw in modern self-improvement is that we start at the goal-setting phase.
We read the book, we get the thin knowledge, we turn the rudder.
And then we just stand on the deck waiting for the ship to change direction, completely ignoring the fact that the massive, thick engines of the basal ganglia are still thrusting us forward on the old path.
Which brings us to the ultimate unresolved contradiction of this whole thing. If willpower is biologically capped, And our conscious intentions are structurally too thin to fight the basal ganglia? We are essentially trapped in our own skulls.
It definitely feels that way.
Right, because the prefrontal cortex can see the right path, but it can't force the body to take it. So how do we actually transfer that new goal from the stressful, transient prefrontal cortex and literally force the basal ganglia to myelinate a new pathway?
Well, we have to realize that we aren't just brains floating in jars.
Right.
To answer that question, we have to look completely outside the skull. We have to pivot away from cognitive psychology entirely and get back to the raw biology of what a human being actually is in physical space.
This is where it gets really crazy.
Queenan highlights this massive, glaring blind spot in how modern society views intelligence. Our nervous system is fundamentally, biologically, neck down.
Neck down.
Yeah.
I really want to unpack this thoroughly for the listener. We basically idolize the brain as this isolated supercomputer, but functionally, it's locked in a pitch-black, silent bone vault.
Yes, it has zero direct access to reality.
Zero direct access.
None. It only receives indirect electrical signals from the sensory organs of the body. And because it operates in the dark like that, the nervous system is desperately, obsessively interested in confirming what Queenan calls physical hypotheses about the external world.
Physical hypotheses.
The brain is essentially a prediction engine. It guesses what the world looks like, and it uses the body to test those guesses.
The walking example in the research absolutely fascinated me.
It's so good, right?
Yeah, it breaks down an action so mundane we literally never think about it and turns it into this constant rolling scientific experiment.
It is the perfect illustration of hypothesis testing. Every single time you take a step, your prefrontal cortex isn't calculating the physics, but your motor cortex and basal ganglia are rapidly firing off a prediction.
Okay, what kind of prediction?
Your brain calculates a hypothesis. Based on my current trajectory, I predict the ground is approximately 3 feet below my center of mass, and I predict it is solid.
And then you swing your leg forward.
Right. And when your foot physically hits the floor, sensory neurons shoot a signal back up the spinal cord. When the physical prediction matches the sensory reality, the nervous system gets a massive hit of confirmation.
A literal chemical reward.
Yes, specifically a dopamine reward prediction error signal. It's the brain going, good job, me. The ground is exactly where I thought it was. My internal map matches the external territory.
Wow.
And it does this thousands of times a day. Your nervous system is constantly craving this physical interaction with the environment just to orient itself.
So wait, the dopamine isn't just a feel-good chemical, which is how pop psychology usually frames it?
No, not at all.
In this context, dopamine is literally the biological mechanism of learning. It's the chemical that tells the basal ganglia, that hypothesis was correct, reinforce this pathway, add some myelin.
Precisely. Dopamine is a learning signal. It is the chemical stamp of approval that turns thin knowledge into thick habit.
Okay.
But here's the critical catch. You do not get that dopamine reinforcement without the physical sensory feedback.
The prefrontal cortex can't just generate it on its own.
No, it cannot generate that specific learning signal purely through abstract thought.
I'm hung up on the metabolic cost aspect of this. If the system demands physical feedback to stay oriented, what happens when you starve the system of that feedback? Like, what happens chemically when hypothesis testing just stops?
The system breaks down catastrophically.
Really?
Yeah. When you look at extreme cases like solitary confinement, you see the pure biological necessity of this neck-down interaction.
Oh, because they have no environment to interact with.
Exactly. If you place a human in a featureless white room where the environment never changes, where there is no meaningful physical resistance, no complex sensory feedback, the nervous system goes into a full-blown crisis.
It's trapped in a void.
It is trapped in a void of unverified hypotheses. And without the steady stream of sensory confirmation, the brain actually begins to generate its own spontaneous action potentials.
Wait, it just makes things up?
Yes. It hallucinates. It fabricates sensory input because it prefers a terrifying imagined reality over a complete lack of physical feedback. It literally needs the physical world to push back so it knows it exists.
Which completely changes how we view education and skill acquisition and behavioral change.
Everything.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's apply this pushback concept to learning.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this analogy while reviewing the data. It means you could read 100 cutting-edge textbooks on the physics of fluid dynamics. You could memorize all the complex equations for buoyancy, drag, water displacement. Your prefrontal cortex could possess perfectly synthesized, thin knowledge of how a human body moves through H2O.
You could easily pass a written exam with a perfect score.
Right. But your basal ganglia has absolutely no idea how to swim until you jump into the water and physically feel the resistance against your limbs. The reading is just the formulation of the hypothesis. The water is the feedback.
I love that. Abstract thought is a map, but the nervous system desperately needs to walk the territory.
Wow.
Even science itself, as Queenan points out, isn't just about sitting in an armchair thinking abstract thoughts. Science is a deeply human enterprise of physical experimentation, of manipulating variables with our hands, and literally drawing pictures of the world.
It's an embodied pursuit.
Exactly. You cannot logic your way out of a bad habit because logic does not produce the sensory feedback required to trigger dopamine and myelinate the basal ganglia.
So you can sit on your couch and perfectly analyze your intention-behavior gap. You can trace your snooze button habit all the way back to your childhood psychology.
You can know exactly why you are failing.
But until you physically alter your interaction with the environment, your basal ganglia learns absolutely nothing. It is completely deaf to your conscious epiphanies.
It only hears the language of physical action and environmental reaction.
Okay, so we have mapped the terrain. We know the prefrontal cortex is just a stressful holding pen for unsolved problems. We know the intention-behavior gap exists because thin, abstract goals get structurally crushed by thick, myelinated habits.
Right.
And we now know that our nervous system is a neck-down prediction machine that only truly learns by testing physical hypotheses against reality.
Which brings us to the most important question.
Yes, the actionable core of this deep dive.
Yeah.
How do we engineer this process? How do we take that biological need for physical movement and use it to deliberately wire a new behavior into our automated operating system?
This is where we bring in the clinical frameworks of David Kolb and Clifford Morris.
Okay, let's get into it.
Their work in experiential learning theory is basically the perfect psychological bridge for this biological reality. They argued decades ago, and modern neuroscience entirely backs them up now, that true, lasting behavioral change is only possible when learning is contextually rich, embodied, and tied to real-world friction.
Let's walk through Kolb's actual four-stage learning cycle because it maps so perfectly onto that prediction error loop we just discussed. He doesn't just vaguely say, go do things. It's a rigorous physiological process.
It is a highly specific cycle. So stage 1 is concrete experience.
Okay.
This is the sensory flood. This is you jumping into the water. You aren't theorizing about swimming. You are physically flailing, feeling the temperature, the drag, the panic. Your nervous system is absorbing massive amounts of raw sensory data.
And crucially, in the context of trying to change a bad habit, this concrete experience usually involves failing, right? Because the old basal ganglia habit is still thicker than your new intention.
Exactly. When you take your abstract rule, let's say, your intention to not snap at your partner when you're stressed, and you deliberately crash it into reality, things get messy.
Yeah, they do.
You will inevitably fail on your first few attempts. You will snap. But that failure provides the raw data for stage 2, which is reflective observation.
This is where the prefrontal cortex comes back online.
Yes. The prefrontal cortex analyzes the discrepancy between what you intended to do, which was stay calm, and what the sensory data shows you actually did, which was yell.
It reviews the failure.
Right. Then you move to stage 3, abstract conceptualization. The prefrontal cortex forms a new hypothesis. It tweaks the motor program. It says, okay, next time I feel my heart rate spike before I speak, I will physically step into the other room.
And then the cycle culminates in stage 4, which is active experimentation.
Yes.
You have to actually implement the treat hypothesis in the real world. You have to wait for the next argument and physically step into the other room.
And that physical act of stepping into the other room is what generates what the clinical literature calls endogenous feedback.
Endogenous feedback. I want to highlight the distinction here because we rely so heavily on exogenous feedback in our society.
We do.
Exogenous being external, like reading a book, listening to a podcast, or having someone tell you that you messed up.
Right. When someone tells you you're wrong or you read a tip in a book, that is exogenous. It's just more thin data for the prefrontal cortex. It does not trigger the deep neuroplasticity.
Okay.
But endogenous feedback is generated from within your own nervous system's physical interaction with reality. When you actively experiment, when you physically try to do something differently and you feel the awkwardness, the internal resistance, the friction of the outcome, that is thick endogenous feedback.
It's the water pushing back against your arms.
Yes. Endogenous feedback is the exact sensory data your nervous system requires to trigger the dopamine prediction error, patch its own code, and lay down new myelin in the basal ganglia.
That makes perfect sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, like the broader philosophical concept of wisdom, practical wisdom isn't just knowing the good.
Right.
It isn't possessing a pristine library of correct ideas in your prefrontal cortex. Practical wisdom is the physical, embodied scar tissue of having tried it, having failed, having received that harsh endogenous feedback of the real world, and adjusting your physical approach until the action finally became an automatic reflex.
So practical wisdom is embodied scar tissue.
Exactly.
That completely recontextualizes the feeling of failure. It means your initial failures aren't evidence that you lack willpower or that you're fundamentally broken. The failure is the necessary mechanical friction required to program the basal ganglia.
You cannot pave the highway without the heavy machinery of physical failure.
Right. You have to give the factory the raw materials of failure so it can build a better automated response. Without that physical trial and error, without Kolb's active experimentation, the conscious mind just spins its wheels in the incubator.
It burns glucose, generates anxiety, and nothing structurally changes.
So, bringing this directly to you, the listener, let's make this aggressively practical. The next time you fail to act on a good intention, the next time you hit snooze or you skip the gym or you reach for your phone to numb out, do not just sit on the couch and overthink it.
No, do not trap yourself in the conscious waiting room analyzing your guilt or questioning your character.
Your nervous system does not need your guilt. Guilt is thin. Your nervous system needs physical data. You have to get up and physically engineer the next attempt. You have to alter the environmental cues to force a new physical reality.
Put your alarm clock in the bathroom so you are physically forced to walk across the cold floor.
Yes. Put your phone in a locked drawer. Let the messy, awkward reality of physically interacting with the environment teach your basal ganglia what your conscious mind could never explain. You have to test the physical hypothesis.
You must act your way into a new way of thinking, because your neuroanatomy explicitly forbids you from thinking your way into a new way of acting.
That is the definitive summary of the biology of behavior. So to wrap this up, we started by realizing that the conscious mind, the intellect we so heavily idolize, is actually just a high-stress holding pin for unsolved problems.
Failure room, yeah.
We mapped the intention-behavior gap, exploring how cognitive load and the structural density of myelin explain why our thin, abstract goals get consistently crushed by our thick, automated habits.
And we discovered that because we are neck-down prediction testing machines, the only biological path to genuinely upgrading our automated operating system is through messy, embroidered, endogenous feedback.
It is a complete inversion of how the modern self-improvement industry tells us to solve our problems.
It really is.
And before we close out this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final lingering implication of this data. Because we have spent the last hour looking at the absolute biological necessity of physical friction for human learning and sanity.
Right.
But when you apply Queenan's insights to the trajectory of our modern digital world, a genuinely terrifying question emerges.
It's a profound structural problem we're facing. If our biological sanity and our ability to myelinate new pathways and our fundamental capacity to gain practical wisdom rely entirely on testing physical hypotheses against the friction of the real world, what happens to our nervous systems as society increasingly pushes us into fictionless, disembodied virtual spaces?
Wow. Think about the architecture of the platforms we use every single day.
The entire goal of digital interface design is to eliminate friction.
Yeah, make it seamless.
Right. So if we spend our lives migrating into the metaverse, or spending 10 hours a day infinitely scrolling on a smooth glass screen environments where physical embodied failure is literally impossible to experience, what happens to the neck-down machine?
Where there is no physical water pushing back against it.
Exactly. Exactly. Without physical implementation to solve our problems and move them out of the prefrontal cortex, do we just regress into a state of permanent, unsolved conscious anxiety?
Which feels like what's happening to everybody right now.
It does. We are actively building a world that starves the nervous system of the exact sensory data it needs to confirm its existence and stay sane.
That is a fascinating and deeply unsettling thought for you to ponder the next time you reflexively pick up a screen to escape a moment of boredom, instead of picking up a physical hobby or stepping outside or enduring the friction of a messy face-to-face conversation. Ask yourself, are you feeding the high-stress incubator, or are you actually building a highway in the factory? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Get out of your head, stop overthinking your thin intentions, and start physically testing your hypotheses in the real messy world today. Your basal ganglia is waiting.